Look at these credits. These are all the people that worked on The Legend of Zelda, or at least the ones Nintendo wants you to know about. But did you know that there are actually people missing from this game? Not because someone forgot, but because there are people that are not allowed to be credited. And they have a name. The gaming industry calls them ghost developers, the invisible creators behind some of the biggest games out there. Secretly hired by major companies, these ghost devs craft everything from level design to even entire games. The only rule? No credits. And that's a huge problem, because with no credits, no proof of work, and no proof of work means no career. So why would any game developer choose to stay invisible, especially in times of mass layoffs? Well, it turns out that not all ghost developers are unhappy about staying hidden. Some of the very people behind the biggest games actually prefer to work this way. But why? Let's find out. So here's what you need to know about credits. They've always been a big deal. From games to movies to TV shows, without your name in the credits, there's no proof of work, no resume, and no future. And that's what makes the world of Ghost, Shadow, or even Ninja developers so strange. They choose to stay uncredited. But in the gaming industry, where layoffs are pretty much common these days, how do you apply for a new job if you can't show your portfolio? Well, to understand this conundrum, I realized there are actually two camps of ghost developers. Those that want to stay uncredited and those that are uncredited without a choice. It's a huge problem in the gaming industry, and it's bigger than I thought, with developers striking and fighting against unfair crediting practices. So, to find out why we have these two camps of ghosts and what has changed, I had to go all the way back to the good old Atari days. Because Atari never credited their employees in their games, you know? Why? Out of pure disregard for their work. They weren't seen as creators, just tools to make the next big hit. But one employee wasn't having it, and it's something that would change gaming literally forever. He secretly coded a hidden room in the game Adventure with the message created by Warren Robinette. When Atari found out a year later, Warren had already left the company, but his secret message was a wake-up call. It showed other developers they did not have to stay invisible. Like Sega. Across the ocean, Yuji Naka, the genius behind Sonic, had the same problem. Denied credit, he secretly added his and his team's names in black text on the black opening screen. Of course, you would never see these names unless you're using this code on a Japanese Mega Drive, which would change the screen to white. These moments of defiance weren't just clever, they were necessary. Developers were just tired of being just another nameless tool. So if getting credited is so important, why would some prefer to stay ghosts? Well, to answer this, I first had to find out why game studios were so secretive about their own game developers to begin with. And I found 4 big reasons. The first reason is simple. There are no standards. In film, we have unions that enforce strict rules on crediting literally everything and everyone. But in gaming, no such rules. And the lack of regulation gives studios pretty much a free pass to decide who gets credited and who doesn't. And that's why game studios can use this against you. Which leads us to reason number 2, bargaining power. You see, when you're the brain behind a hit game, you're not just entitled for a raise, but other studios can snatch you up too. And to prevent this, studios prefer to keep things quiet, so you have no bargaining power over them. It usually works, but sometimes it does backfire. Just like at Atari. 5 of their top talents had enough, left the company, and made history by starting the first third-party game publisher ever, Activision. And boy, did Activision credit their developers literally everywhere. The third reason is pretty sneaky. Punishment. If you leave before game's release, you won't see your name in the credits, even though you worked your ass off. And that was the case with Gotham Knight. Warner Brothers put over 100 longtime developers into the special thanks section. Without their titles, of course. No credits for those that don't stick around. Meanwhile, names like Sweet Baby Inc. are front and center, a useless narrative consulting firm that did practically no valuable work on any game. Anyways, threatening developers with credits to push them through the finish line is unfortunately pretty common. Rockstar Games, for instance, man, they are notorious for this. After crunch working on Manhunt 2, GTA 5 and Red Dead for years, those who left before release were also left off the credits. The only proof they exist is on some page on Rockstar's website, with no details of their work, of course. But then there's reason number 4, which struck me the most. Branding. Studios want to maintain the illusion that their games are built entirely in-house. The truth, many rely on external teams to handle the grunt work. But acknowledging that would dilute the brand, you know? And that's why some game studios become real branding divas. Just like Nintendo. You'd think Donkey Kong, Mario Kart, or Metroid Prime were all Nintendo's doing? Not quite. Much of the grunt work was done by Retro Studios in Texas. But when Metroid Prime Remastered rolled out, Nintendo lumped the developers into a mere 15 words. A travesty, according to the developers. Now, to hold up the brand illusion, the list of uncredited work is endless. From super old games to even the latest and greatest stars, studios are free to do whatever they want without facing any real consequences. Even Robin Williams, a huge Legend of Zelda fan, by the way, who famously named his daughter Zelda, commented on the lack of recognition in gaming, saying the gaming industry is lacking recognizable stars. And he was right. While a few are well known, it's true that game developers aren't exactly household names. EA, back in the days, actually tried to combat that by depicting developers as artists, celebrating them in ad campaigns like they were the next Beatles of the gaming world. But that was just EA, you know? No other studio would do that. And so to this day, developers have been fighting to be credited where credit is due. Except ghost developers, who are never credited for their work and prefer it this way. But why? Well, the answer brought me to the biggest and yet most invisible game studio you've probably never heard of. But before I tell you about the biggest game studio you've probably never heard of, let's talk about something else that's invisible. The struggle to keep track of passwords.
The password is?
Yep, you know that moment. And you're totally blank because you either have too many or you're tweaking the same one across sites. Like me. And that's why I've been using NordPass, who's also the sponsor of this video. Built by the folks behind NordVPN, NordPass is a very solid password manager that I personally use as a browser extension. It's got a simple UI, it's easy to set up, and it lets you create, store, and share passwords within a team if you're using it as a business. It even alerts you if any of your info ends up in a data breach online. But what makes a password manager actually trustworthy? Well, NordPass follows strict no-logs policies, very important. And it uses zero-knowledge architecture and XCHA-20 encryption, all just fancy terms to say that even NordPass cannot see what you store. And speaking of storing, you can store more than just passwords. From passkeys, secure notes, personal and credit card info, you can store all those and share them between employees. So if you're ready to give your invisible password assistant a try, use my code Belinda at nordpass.com/Belinda for a free 3-month trial of NordPass Business. No credit card needed. Link is in the description below. Now, let me introduce you to the biggest and yet most invisible gaming studio in the world, TOSE. Based in Kyoto, Japan, TOSE's 3,000 employees have worked on more than 2,000 games and are still pumping out about 100 games per year. From Dragon Quest to Zelda, Final Fantasy, Metal Gear, Resident Evil, the list is so long, you might start asking which game they didn't work on. TOSE has been secretly developing games for all the major publishers since 1979. They handle everything from ideating to level, sound design, porting, and yeah, even entire games. Like the Starfy series, the only game they actually own the rights to.
The legendary Starfy.
But if you ask them, they'd rather not say anything. Their company policy prohibits them from taking credit, unless an overseas client insists. And don't even bother looking them up. YouTube channel, empty. LinkedIn, just another game dev company. Their website, doesn't reveal much either. The games you see there are only a fraction of what they've worked on. As their wiki page says, they're the real shadow samurai of the industry. But again, why stay uncredited when everyone else is fighting for it? Well, it turns out it's a Japan thing. Over there, gamers often choose games based on the publisher, not so much the developer. It's actually very common to say in Japan, hey, I'm gonna play this and that game because it's from publisher Atari, Nintendo, or Square Enix. And because of this culture, TOSE's vision has always been of not having a vision at all. Our policy is not to have a vision, they said in an interview. We follow the customer's vision. And by doing that, they focus on their main strategy, building a company that lasts forever by staying behind the scenes. As TOSE's CEO put it, I think it's best to become number one by being a behind-the-scenes player. And you know what? That strategy is working. If a game's a hit, they profit. If it flops, TOSE isn't on the hook. They just move on to another client's game. No one will know. But with all this secrecy, how do new clients find them? Well, in Japan, TOSE is already well known amongst publishers. But to reel in foreign clients, they invite them over to their hidden office vault containing all their secret games, a private showcase of their uncredited work. It's like a clandestine museum where future clients get to see TOSE's work without any titles ever being publicly disclosed. But here's the catch. There's always a catch. What works in Japan doesn't work overseas necessarily. And that's the challenge with ghost dev companies. It's just hard to sell yourself if you can't talk about your work. And so when TOSE tried to break into the US, they hit a wall. Western publishers wanted to see public portfolios, titles to verify, and demos to test. But due to strict confidentiality agreements, TOSE couldn't openly showcase their past work. But that's how it goes with ghost developers, especially in Japan. There, the brand is everything. If gamers knew who really worked on these games, it would dilute the brand way too much. And the worry is that gamers will say, wait a minute, Square Enix didn't make that? I thought they did. And that's where things get interesting. This brand illusion is starting to crumble. Despite their efforts to stay hidden, TOSE has been on the news lately. They're in trouble due to layoffs and game cancellations. And ironically, it's Square Enix that's pulling the plug. After Square canceled $140 million worth of games, TOSE, who's been working with Square for ages, is now showing red numbers with losses in the millions. We all know mass layoffs are hitting the industry everywhere, but in Japan, mass layoffs aren't as common because they have really strong worker protections. So instead of letting go people, they let go games, which is good for some, but really bad for TOSE's business. And that's the thing with ghost developers. It's a double-edged sword. Work without recognition and stability without visibility. It's a trade-off between credit and job security. But as we know, no job is ever secure, especially not in the West, where we're using credits as a power play. Trapping workers in a studio, denying them recognition, and suppressing their bargaining power, that will just backfire. As an industry insider states, while American capitalism is all about profit, and profit, in Japan, the thinking is different. And as I said, there they rather cancel games than people. And that's why they're much better at keeping talented developers than some Western studios. Companies like Xbox rather throw pizza parties for laid-off developers. Instead of trying to keep them, they feed them a few goodbye slices of pepperoni to show gratitude for their hard work. And so, TOSE might be around for many more years to come. With their loyal army of developers, they can easily pivot to whatever becomes more popular, whether that's mobile games, smart devices, or the next big thing. So those ghost developers aren't going anywhere for now.